This is Joe from ArtAlienTV, and today, for you space geeks and freaks out there, I have a bunch of things to show you, and some of them are big, famous things that have been found or were found years and years ago, but I've also got some new finds for you, which are really interesting, and are similar to some of the things I've shown recently, like plants and foliage on the ground as well. But first of all, I'm going to show you this. Now, a lot of you will recognise this because this is quite a famous feature on Mars, and it's known as the Keyhole Structure or the Exclamation Mark. NASA came up with the name Exclamation Mark, but other researchers since then have named it the Keyhole Structure. So you can Google those and images will come up. What I've done here, unlike all the other articles you'll ever see on this particular structure, I've uploaded the full res high-rise images from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter here, and they're in high detail. In other words, these are quite large, and normally when you see pictures of this on Google Images or on YouTube or whatever, you'll see very badly compressed and downsized images. Okay, these are full size, and you can link to the original images by clicking on this link up here at the top right, just under where it says NASA. There's a little thing there that will take you to the page. So top left, this is raw. Top right, enhanced. This one here, enhanced color. And then bottom right here is enhanced color turned negative. And you can really see the shape of this thing. Now, this thing's really large, and it's been compared to structures on Earth by many researchers out there. This is a particularly nice one I found recently. Wedge and dome comparison. Left, Mars formation here. MRO, yeah, that's the one we've got. And on the right, we have Kofun in Japan, built in 400 AD, this structure here. Now, the one in Japan, I'm not sure how big it is. It looks pretty big, but it's probably something like maybe 100 meters or two, perhaps. I don't know exactly how big this thing is. But the one on Mars here is absolutely huge. This thing is nearly 3,000 meters from here to here, from tip to toe, okay? So this thing is absolutely massive, and you can actually measure it on here. The top part here is over 0.5 kilometre in length, right? Just that bit there. It's absolutely massive. Basically, I just thought I would show you this because I know a lot of you are interested in some of these older things that have been around for years. And you may have seen these on things like Ancient Aliens and other shows on the TV, on the History Channel, that kind of thing. And also many people have done features on this on websites, UFO and Mars Anomaly websites going back decades. I've also got it on Google Mars here as well. It's actually just to the west of Due Marthery, which is a crater here, with another crater on the edge of it. So you just go above and to the left, and it's just here. Or if you type in Libia Montes, it's just above the Libia Montes region, which is down here. And you go straight up. There's Libia Montes, this here area here. We got these large craters, and then just above this one here, with the weird chain craters in the middle and the structure there, you go directly above that. Conversely, you could actually just type in exclamation mark into the search box and it should find it, okay? But it's marked anyway, and what I've done here is I've added the coordinates. This is my marker here, keyhole structure stroke exclamation mark. It's got the coordinates there. I've also put a link to that Gigapan I just showed you, high-rise Gigapan, but there's actually a link to the MRO high-rise image page here anyway, So you can click on that link down there and it will take you to the page, and you can download images that way as well if you wish. The image quality is pretty poor and there's no real detail in here. And if you look at it with the magnifier, it's even worse. I mean, it's pixelated, it's been badly downsized. Most of the image, well, in fact, all the images that they use mostly come from the Mars satellites, like the Mars Viking mission back in the 70s. But the images have been downsized and compressed. A lot of them are taken also from the Odyssey mission as well, which is from about 2001. But what they do, they get the images and then they downsize them into JPEGs, and you get all these JPEG kind of artifacts. When you zoom in, you can see all these weird distortion lines here in this little grid pattern. That's because they were using JPEGs, which is always a bad idea. But it says something like 2,600. Okay, so it's not quite 3 kilometers. It's about 2.6. There's loads of detail in here. If we go into this one, you can see almost every rock on the surface here. And anything over about a meter you can see. So these rocks are just about 1.5 meters plus. This one here. So you're seeing really good detail here. And if you were to be stood next to it, say down here where that rock is, that's approximately how big you would be. As big as that one there, okay? If you stood next to it, you would be about the same height as that shadow there. So that's how big you would be, and this is how big the whole thing is. Huge. 2,600 meters roughly from here to here. The official explanation for this is quite amusing. Turn this image sideways, so north is to the right. Okay, that's what I've done here. And the high-standing landforms look like an exclamation mark. High-standing landforms. Okay, that's what they called it. The origin of these hills may be difficult to understand, yeah, especially if you work for NASA and you're not allowed to say anything on such ancient terrain. The straight edges suggest fractures related to faults. Maybe this feature was lifted up by the faulting. Maybe the surrounding terrain has been eroded down over billions of years, or both. Well, it's certainly been eroded, yes. But this is an artificial structure. Now, it looks like a natural structure that's been modified. Much like the face on Mars, which is actually an artificial Kodiak. You can argue whether it's a face or not, the giant face on Mars in Cydonia. But the actual structure that it's on is a modified Kodiak, and that's what this is. Now, that means that this was an island, and it looks like it's been artificially shaped. It's a geometric shape. It's too good to be some random thing that's just formed from a fault line or something. And there's no evidence of fault lines near this thing. It's on a flat plane when you look on Google Mars. So the explanation they give for these things, as usual, is actually completely off the mark, I think. It gives you a hint that they're a bit confused because it's a very confused explanation. In other words, the person writing it probably didn't believe it when he wrote it and wasn't allowed to say that this was likely to be an artificial structure. So there we are. I mean, this is fairly typical. And if you go to the Mars page, you can read that on the Mars page from here. If you click on the link. And this is typical of what you get from NASA. They give you hints, but they never tell you directly what you're looking at if it's something artificial. They just give you hints by making up a word salad like this, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, to be honest, either geologically or logically. And this is carrying on from my last video, which is about the giant plants in the southern polar region, which I showed. And I showed them at different times of year and how they change. And this is another example here. This one here is merged infrared, red and blue, this one here. And this one here is RGB. Now the actual colour of this is probably somewhere between these two. Okay, this tends to exaggerate the yellows slightly. This one tends to exaggerate the red slightly. And in fact, if you look up here, you can see the red filter here and the green filter here. Okay, so the real image color is probably somewhere between these two, which is why I put both of them up. But this is supposed to be a crater, but there's not a lot to be said about this on the actual page. It says crater with spiders on one side and polygons on other. Right? Okay, no explanation about what it's actually supposed to be, this thing. And what it looks like is a crater, but with a mound in it. Right? And on that mound, we have this weird, sort of almost diamond-shaped or elliptical shaped feature here, which is like a depression that almost looks like it's been kind of cut out, right? Very strange. And then if we look at it here, you can see it probably a bit more clearly. But it's got all these spiders and things around it. Now, as I've said before, a lot of it is just caused by outgassing. The ice here melts, it gasses off. It doesn't melt into a water or liquid. It melts into a gas. It kind of vaporizes because of the very low pressure on Mars, right? And then it leaves kind of black stains, the carbon leaves stains. But not all of this, I think, is caused by that. Because if you look around, a lot of this stuff looks like greenery and plants on the surface as well, much like I showed in the previous video, but not as complex as those. So I'm wondering whether a lot of these are just kind of carbon stains on the actual ice here. But does carbon stain green? I don't think it does. Carbon stains black, right? And the only reason that I think NASA say that most of these are just caused by carbon gassing and sublimating is because they're only looking at the black and white images or showing you images which are predominantly black and white. And when you look up close, they're not. And even in the red one here, the RGB one, which is overly red, you can see the green. It's more of a dark browny green here, but it's there, right? And you go into this one, and it's a much kind of greener green. Now, what I actually think is happening is, with a lot of this stuff, it's not just carbon gas that's causing these marks on the ground, which look almost like ink stains or mould, and they may actually be a type of fungi in this particular case. Whereas I think the tree-like structures I showed in my last video, I think are more like a lichen or moss. These look different and are more like the mould structures that I showed in that video as well. Now, what I think is happening with this stuff is that as the carbon ice melts, the carbon ice may well have underneath it a layer of actual water ice, H2O ice. Okay, and as the carbon ice melts, some of that water may also melt as well and may outgas and freeze and stuff like that as well. But in that process, perhaps it may trigger some sort of life form that's in that water layer underneath, just below the ice. The ice underneath melts and you get a growth of either an algal bloom or some kind of algae-like life form similar to algae or something similar, some kind of plant, which may be being forced out of some of these cracks. And in some cases, like the giant spiders that I've shown, I actually think they're causing the cracks in the ice. As the ice starts to melt below, the water melts below the actual carbon ice that's on top. And I think what's happening is getting a build-up of gas there, but also it triggers perhaps these life forms to germinate and grow very rapidly. And then they crack through the actual ice. Now, I'm just going to show you this one again. Now, this is from my previous video. This one here, this huge one here, which is only partly in colour, is over 2,000 metres from here, from the right to the left there. It's just over 2,000 metres. So this is almost as big as that giant keyhole structure I showed you in this image. It's almost as big as this. In fact, it's as big as that main part of it there, which is about 2,000 meters across or long, right? So this is huge. And when you look at these up close, let's look at this one. You can actually see. Now, a lot of people said, "Oh, it's just cracks on the ground." Yes, there are cracks on the ground, but if you look at the formation of these cracks, they seem to form in a plant-like manner, with branches coming off in certain directions here. They're all sort of splaying out like this. So what I think is happening is that there are life forms that live under the ice. And as that melts, you get black stains caused by the carbon ice melting, all right, and sublimating. It's called sublimating. But what happens then, as the ice melts away, the plants then push through the ground, the permafrost. They may live just under the ground, say that they may be a number of feet below the actual surface, or in the surface, maybe only a few inches. But it looks like, if you look at these closely, you can actually see these cracks coming out. And the best one to look at, I think, is this one here. Right, let's look at the center of this one. All right, we have cracks, but then we have what look like green kind of runners coming out, like roots or branches coming out of them as well. So we've got a mixture of cracks in the ground and then these kind of vine-like structures coming out as well, okay? So what I think is happening with this particular variety is that the vines are pushing through the permafrost as it softens and melts in the spring, and then they sprout and then spread like wildfire, like we got here. Now bear in mind, the atmosphere on Mars is something like 95 or 96% carbon dioxide. On Earth, it's something like 0.2% or 0.3%, which is a tiny trace element on Earth. On Mars, it's the exact opposite. It has a huge amount of carbon dioxide, according to what we're told. Now, that means that any plant life on the surface will grow rapidly and giant. In other words, this would explain why these are so large. If you were to take a cutting from one of these and bring it back to Earth and grow it on Earth in natural Earth conditions, it wouldn't grow very large unless you put it in an environment similar to this with very, very high, getting on almost up to 100% carbon dioxide environment. This is not about 95%. That, I think, fluctuates between 95 and 96. Okay? So what you have is perfect conditions here. And not only that, you have quite a thin atmosphere, which means there's a lot of direct sunlight and ultraviolet light, which means that any chlorophyll production from plant material would happen at a rapid rate because of the extra radiation, and add that to the huge amount of carbon dioxide available, you have giant species of plants on Mars. A lot of these things seem to grow under the ice, and you only see them in their true colour when the ice melts. Now bear in mind it's very cold on Mars, and the ice would only melt in a lot of these areas in the summer months, the spring and summer months, and then for the rest of the time it'll all be frozen over. So there's probably only a short period of a few months when these can actually break through the ice on the ground or the permafrost, and then the branches push through and then spread along the ground like a vine, okay? Kind of lichen with a sort of vine structure to it. Because if you look at this here, you can actually see a dark patch here where it looks like it's come out, there's a kind of crack, and then all these kind of branches are coming out of the crack and then they're all kind of joined up. So some of these are cracks in the ground, but that's where they're coming out of the ground through the permafrost that's just soft enough for it to get through. And then, of course, what would happen then when winter comes along, or autumn and winter, this would ice over again and would die off and probably go black. As it dies off, the plants would die off and go sort of dark. They would go brown and wilt like leaves do on trees here, and then eventually turn into a kind of black mulch. And that is possibly what we are seeing on the surface, then of course that would freeze over, and you would have loads of this black mulch as in the ground, which is a type of carbon. As it rots down, it would probably produce methane, which we see massive spikes of in some parts of Mars, and it would also create nitrogen as it rots down, a mixture of nitrogen and methane. In the autumn and winter, when these die off, there should be a spike of methane and other gases caused by these things dying off, because there's so many of these. They go right round Mars. And I didn't show you that in my last video, but when you look at the southern and northern parts of Mars, the zoom out, you can see all this green material, but because of the way this map has been made, most of the greens have been removed and turned brown by using an orange filter. But in some areas you can see what looks like loads of weird sort of foliage on the ground. That's what we're looking at, right? This stuff doesn't show very well because the images are not high enough resolution, right? But when we look at them like this, when we get proper close-ups from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter like this is the real detail. This is what they actually look like. Now, in the summer, they appear green. They then turn a sort of reddish colour and go brown. And eventually, as they rot away, they go black. Then they freeze. And I think a lot of the things we're seeing on the surface are remnants of some of these things, like possibly here, that have died off. So we have a mixture of gas stain from sublimation, from carbon, but also possibly other gases as these things rot down and then refreeze into the ice and frost like we have here. So we have a mixture of green and black and sort of brown stuff going on here, right? That's my explanation. Now, NASA have never really, I don't think, explained this stuff very well. They've kind of skirted around it, and they just jokingly call these things spiders, and they're everywhere. They're all over the southern hemisphere, going right round the polar region, as well as in the northern hemisphere. Things that I've showed that look like giant domes, which are actually huge apple-shaped kind of plants, which look like giant vegetables, right? Which are absolutely astonishing. And I've done a bunch of videos about those. I think there are many varieties of these different types of things that grow on the surface, but they're reacting with the ice, the carbon ice, but also some of them are sending probably runners right down into the actual ground, because we know there are underground aquifers below the surface of Mars, okay? They've been spotted, a number of them, and they're probably all over the place. But the point is, these plants have adapted to extreme cold conditions that only really come to life as that ice melts in the spring and leave these black marks everywhere as they die off. So it's caused by a mixture of rotting vegetable material and outgassing from the carbon ice. So you've got a real concoction of stuff going on here. But this is how good many of these Mars images are, especially from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, because it zooms right in and it's got a massive camera on it. The thing is really, really awesome. Okay, so like I said, check out those links, check out the links below, check out the card links coming up if you want to see similar things. Go back through onto my channel page and you can see all the different playlists there, all the structures, all the plants, all the different things, okay? And some of it is quite astonishing. And NASA still say nothing. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.